What do you think about no seasonal affix in Dragonflight Season 2? Is it Blizzard's worst decision yet, or the best decision for Mythic Plus? What a great question. So here's what I think about no seasonal affix for Dragonflight Season 2. Let me break down some facts for you. Mythic Plus was introduced with Legion expansion. And as you can see, there were plenty of dungeons in Legion to go about. The problem with Legion was the fact that you only had those dungeons to play throughout the entire expansion. So for 2 years, you only played the same old dungeons every single season. There were still seasons and there were affixes, but there were no seasonal affixes. The only difference was what class was OP, what was the flavor of the month spec, how good people got in the meantime, how more comfortable they got playing. Now, arguably, there were a lot of dungeons that were really, really good in Legion. But there were also a lot of OP classes, and at a certain point in the expansion, you didn't even need a healer to run super high keys. And then came BFA, with the introduction of the first seasonal affix, which if I remember correctly, it was Infested. And BFA arguably had some of the best Mythic Plus dungeons out there. There were a lot of other problems during that expansion with Azerite armor and some other things. I'm not going to get into that right now. But those that really played Mythic Plus during BFA had a great experience, myself included. And this is where you had dungeons like Ataldazar, Freehold, Motherlode, Underrot, and many others. And of course, you also had some that were not as good, such as Siege of Borealis and Tol de Gore with all of its mobs tagging through walls and through different floors. But most of them were actually very good. And the fact that they introduced the seasonal affix, I personally believe, was a great addition to the game. Now, one interesting thing about BFA is that we got to see both what a good seasonal affix is and what a bad seasonal affix is. So BFA taught us both ends of the spectrum. And then, of course, came Shadowlands. And I'm not even going to talk about all of the problems that the expansion had, but I will say many of those went into Mythic Plus as well and affected a lot of players' experience overall. One great thing that they did at the end of Shadowlands with Season 4 is the fact that they did a dungeon rotation. It was the first time after so many years. It's been 5.5 years, coupled with the fact that they had one of the best Mythic Plus seasonal affixes. All of that pretty much contributed to make people's impressions be like, hey, hold on a second. This is actually pretty cool. So me personally, I think that Blizzard rolled the dice on that one. And it just so seemed like all of the stars aligned for them. And it was actually very good. They also did a lot of interesting things by this time. They had fixed a lot of the issues with the Shadowlands expansion. A lot of different specs were playable. Some were a little bit overpowered, I have to say. You know, we don't typically see survival hunters, but they were definitely the spec to play at that point in the last season. Blood Decay was probably the best iteration up until that date that we had seen. And it was also very good to play and very fun to play. And this applied to a whole bunch of other specs. But this is where I believe the question came, both from the developers as well as the players. Is this really a good, honest perception of the state of the game? So think about it like this. What if Season 4 started, they decided to do a dungeon rotation, but then all of a sudden the seasonal affix is not that good? Would that have completely skewed the impression of doing a dungeon rotation? What if people would have perceived it as, you know what, maybe the seasonal affix is not that bad, maybe it's the dungeons that they picked, and that's why this season sucks. So you understand what I'm saying? It's a little bit confusing. Yeah, sure, some of the dungeons were good and the seasonal affix was good, and there were a lot of different issues that players were confronted with before in the game that they managed to address. So was that a correct interpretation? Did all of the stars align for them? And now they were able to say, hey, we actually made a good decision? Or was it influenced by a whole bunch of other factors that could be extremely difficult to replicate in the future? Which brings us to Dragonflight. So they decided to launch the expansion with the typical 8 dungeons, but only make 4 of them playable during the first season, with the promise that they're going to make the other 4 playable in future seasons. Why did Blizzard decide to remove the seasonal affix? And I understand why so many people are concerned about that, because I was actually concerned about it at the beginning. But then I thought about it. And most of the times what I like to do is I like to give the benefit of the doubt. I like to give a little bit of a chance. Let me see what comes out of it. I don't have all of the facts. I don't have all of the data. Changes are coming very rapidly, and we know that once the release is in place, they will do a whole bunch of changes to the dungeons. They will do a lot of class balancing, a lot of nerfs, a lot of buffs. And although so many players at a very high level have expressed the opinion that they don't believe that removing the seasonal affix is a good idea, I want to give the counter argument. I want to ask the question, what good can come out of it? They will do their very best to make something good come out of it, and they will not stop until they will succeed. They have proven this pretty much from the release of this expansion's beta to date, and they have been very quick to respond to a lot of feedback from different categories of players. The number one thing that I care about is dungeons. That's why I always ask the question, are dungeons good? I don't care about affixes. The way in which I see it is like this. Dungeons are the natural beauty, and the affixes are the makeup that is going to enhance or decrease the natural beauty. But if the natural beauty isn't there because the dungeons aren't good, affixes are not going to fix bad dungeons. I've argued this for many years. A good affix is not going to fix a bad dungeon, and a bad affix is not gonna make a good dungeon completely unplayable. It might give you a little bit of a skewed perception of it, but if the dungeon is actually good, just the fact that an affix is not that good, it's a little bit of an inconvenience, like we have seen, for example, with the seasonal affix of storming during this first season of Dragonflight. That doesn't completely skew our perception of the actual dungeons. People are not having a hard time playing Ruby life pools because the affixes are making it a nightmare. It is just a challenging dungeon. It is above average, and you actually need to bring your A game. You need to know what you're doing. Whilst if you go into Court of Stars, pretty much nothing in Court of Stars does nothing. Even bosses have been nerfed to the ground. Bosses that previously posed a challenge, like boss number 2 and especially the last boss. As long as you have 1 or 2 people that can coordinate some AoE interrupts, trash is not going to be a problem. As long as your healer is on point and people do line of sight a couple of casts during fortified weeks, you're gonna do fine versus enforcers. So the problem, for example, with Court of Stars is the fact that it's a below average dungeon. So any affix you throw at it is not gonna make this dungeon higher quality. But if you look at something like Algathar Academy, this is a good example of a well-designed, well-balanced dungeon. It has trash that is challenging, has bosses that are challenging. You can easily wipe. If you are on point and you play well, you will be rewarded. You can do a lot of different creative pulls depending on what affixes you have. Certain packs you can avoid during bolstering week. And this is what I like to see in the future. I like to see well-designed dungeons that people actually have the desire to go in and experience and play for themselves. But if the dungeons are bad and the dungeons suck, the mechanics are unplayable, the design is not well executed, which means they drop the ball on the development side of things, no affix, and especially no seasonal affix, is going to be able to change all of that. However, if the opposite is true and the dungeons are very well designed and you happen to miss a seasonal affix or get a complete revamp of some of the other affixes, as we are getting during Season 2 of Dragonflight, that is not going to completely skew your perception of the dungeons. Sure, they might be a little bit harder. Sure, some of them might have some annoying trash pulls. Sure, some of them might have some bosses that are a little bit annoying. I'm already thinking of one in Neltharion especially. But overall, I think they will do a very good job if they just make the dungeons good and they stop focusing so much on all of these makeup-like additions that come in the form of different affixes. So overall, I think it's a good change. Looking forward to experiencing it at least for a season and see where that goes. If they decide to keep it for the rest of the expansion, that's okay. Let's just go through the experiment first. Let's get some feedback. Let's see what happens, because we've never had a situation where we also rotated dungeons and didn't have a seasonal affix. Let's see where this is going. Is this good? Is this bad? We'll experience it for a season, and then we can come back. And those people that are right, well, we'll just have to give them a pat on the back and say, you were right. And those people that were wrong, and I could be wrong, we'll say, hey, listen, you were wrong. And we'll just have to deal with that, drop our ego, and listen to higher qualified people in the future. I hope that answers your question. That was a great question. If anybody else has any input, let me know. Well, that was it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Make sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the future videos we're uploading. Thank you very much for watching this one, and I will see you guys in the next one. If you want to watch another clip from the live stream, definitely click here. I recommend this one. And if you want to watch the full live stream, click here.